On a narrow hinge of land between desert and sea, a story of faith, empire, and modern warfare has unfolded. Palestine was forged across 3 millennia: Bronze Age city-states, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, Hellenistic dynasts, Roman and Byzantine provinces, early Islamic caliphates, Crusader fortresses, Mamluk roads, the long Ottoman centuries. In the last 100 years, the map was redrawn again and again. British Mandate, 1948, 1967, intifadas, shifting borders, sieges and ceasefires, missiles and drones, targeted raids and airstrikes, propaganda and counter-propaganda, turning words into weapons. Homes, schools, and screens became part of the battlefield. This documentary is strictly informational and non-partisan. No advocacy, only context, sources, and verifiable facts. To comply with YouTube's guidelines and audience sensitivities, we will not show graphic imagery. We'll rely on maps, archival material, declassified records, satellite analysis, and carefully contextualized testimony. But how did one of history's oldest crossroads become the most dramatic place of our time? This is the entire history of Palestine. The olive tree stands as one of humanity's most enduring symbols. Sacred to Isis in ancient Egypt, called liquid gold by Homer's Greeks, a symbol of peace in the Hebrew Psalms. For Christians, it evokes Gethsemane, where Christ prayed. For Muslims, it connects to the Prophet Muhammad himself. Cultivated as early as the 8th millennium BCE in the Levant, this ancient tree has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across a land known by many names: Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, and Palestine. Contrary to common misconceptions, the name Palestine appears in texts far older than its supposed Roman origin. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing centuries before Rome's dominance, used this name to describe the southern Levant. The word likely derives from the Paliset, one of the mysterious sea peoples who appeared in both Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources during the Late Bronze Age. The name Palestine, when referring to both place and people, predates its Roman usage by millennia. Yet this land has carried many identities throughout history. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, appears in biblical sources with boundaries that sometimes included parts of Lebanon and Syria, while excluding southern regions the Bible called the land of Edom. The Holy Land emerged as a Christian designation in the Middle Ages, focusing primarily on Jerusalem and other sites sacred to Christianity. Canaan broadly referred to the southern Levant in ancient texts. The historical kingdoms of Israel and Judah ruled parts of this territory, but never reigned over all of Canaan or the Promised Land. Throughout the ages, the boundaries of what people considered Israel, Palestine, Canaan, Judea, and the Holy Land shifted dramatically, sometimes including various parts of modern Israel, Palestine, contracting or expanding beyond them at different times. The story begins in the Neolithic Stone Age, when agricultural societies were already forming along the Levantine coast. By the Bronze Age, these settlements had grown in size and complexity, and Palestine entered a long period of contact with the Eastern Mediterranean world. Bronze Age Palestine, or Canaan, was primarily a clan-based society, a collection of urban and rural settlements decorating the rich countryside. These would eventually develop into the various kingdoms known from biblical sources: Moab, Edom, Israel, and Judah. The religious composition of the time was likely a broader Semitic polytheism, much like their northern cousins, who would become the Phoenicians. The interplay of this common religious milieu appears in how the storm god Baal, a popular Phoenician deity, influenced later deities like El and Yahweh. Their hybridization would eventually lead to the God of the Hebrew Bible. Like any land straddling the crossroads between empires, Canaan was caught in the geopolitics of the period's giants. Throughout the Bronze Age, ancient Egypt proved to be a steady influence on the broader Near East, while Canaanite cities continued trading with both Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia as the trade networks of the epoch expanded. As the late Bronze Age dawned in the 1500s BCE, the sun god of the Egyptians, Ra, wrestled in the sky with the storm god of the Hittites, Tahuna, for control of the lands where Yahweh and El would emerge. Canaan became one of the battlegrounds between the mighty Hittite and Egyptian empires during this period, eventually falling under Egyptian control. The Egyptians left a physical mark on the region, building various administrative complexes throughout Canaan. Under Egyptian rule, local Canaanite clan structures survived, though the local culture became infused with Egyptian elements. This cultural entanglement was common throughout the late Bronze Age. Canaanite populations during this time worshipped a mixture of Egyptian and local deities, as evidenced in the Phos temple at Tel Lachish, where a local proto-cult mixed with worship of the Egyptian goddess Hathor. The end of the Bronze Age in the 1200s BCE brought significant turbulence and marked a crucial turning point for the region. During this period, a name approximating Palestine appears, possibly through the Peleset tribe of the so-called Sea Peoples. The Peleset may have originated from Greece, though this remains unconfirmed, and their name first appears in Egyptian records. The Sea Peoples are often blamed for causing the Bronze Age collapse through mass raids. However, modern scholars question the paradigm of mass invasions and migrations, as well as the notion that these were one cohesive ethnic group. Cultural mixture between new arrivals and existing populations was probably extensive. While evidence exists for social disruption, it's better understood as Palestine undergoing a transition into the more decentralized Iron Age. Throughout the Iron Age, Palestine became a diverse tapestry of many cultures. This was also an era of political consolidation, when kingdoms began appearing along the coast and in the hinterlands. In the coastal region of Pentapolis, a confederation of 5 primarily Philistine cities formed. In the south, the Kingdom of Edom reigned over what is today the Negev Desert. In the east, the Kingdom of Moab controlled the east bank of the Jordan River. In 1208 BCE, the first mention of Israelites as a people outside the Hebrew Bible appears in the Merneptah Stele. During this period, biblical accounts begin to correspond more definitively with historical events. In the central hinterlands and the north, the kingdoms of Judah and Israel formed from the consolidation of tribal clans. The biblical King David is likely a real historical figure from the 9th century BCE, as archaeologists have discovered records mentioning him by name in the land of the historical Kingdom of Israel, dating to a few decades after his supposed reign. Religious life across the Levantine realms during this time was in transition. Rituals like keeping kosher appeared, but polytheism remained the norm in most kingdoms. Canaanite polytheism was similar to Phoenician religion, as they were related peoples whose languages both belonged to the Semitic family. However, Phoenician and Canaanite religions had regional differences. As kingdoms consolidated, a single god would emerge from their polytheistic pantheons as the chief and patron deity of each kingdom. The first temple of Judaism appeared in Jerusalem during this period, a religious complex devoted to Yahweh, the patron god of Israel. First Temple Judaism differed significantly from later Judaism. The Jewish people during this period were monolatric, meaning they believed in other gods, but devoted their worship specifically and singularly to Yahweh. The various kingdoms of the region traded and warred with each other as frequently as their Mediterranean neighbours did. The two kingdoms of Israel and Judah were most likely one kingdom that split into two sometime in the 10th century BCE. due to internal strife. However, recent scholarly debates consider the opposite possibility, that the two kingdoms merged at some point during the reigns of Kings Josiah and Hezekiah, though the exact timing remains uncertain. As the early Iron Age transitioned into the late Iron Age, Palestine's kingdoms fought one another, while empires began forming around them. During this era, biblical sources become more useful as historical primary sources, with the Kingdom of Judah taking center stage. A Paleo-Hebrew writing system based on the Phoenician alphabet began appearing during this period. Pentapolis, Moab, and Edom continued to exist and interact with both the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Biblical stories of kings like Josiah, who probably initiated the shift toward monotheism in Judaism, and Hezekiah, who withstood a siege by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, come to the fore during this period. However, many of these biblical books were written centuries after these kings' reigns. The historical legacy of these legendary Jewish kings is sometimes evident in the archaeological record, such as in the cisterns underneath Jerusalem, which were built during Hezekiah's reign. Eventually, the heyday of the Hebrew kingdoms ended when the armies of Marduk marched from Babylonia. Sweeping into the Levant, the Babylonian Empire descended from Syria and destroyed the Kingdom of Israel around 720 BCE. Judah survived for 2 more centuries, until 587 BCE, when it too was destroyed and the first temple in Jerusalem was ruined. Other local Canaanite kingdoms were also annexed by the Babylonians. For Judaism, this marked the start of the Babylonian exile, where biblical sources claim the Jewish people were expelled from Palestine to Babylon. However, it was primarily the elites who were exiled to Babylon. This would prove a seminal turning point in Judaism's history, transforming it from a regional sect with roots in local Canaanite religious ideals to one influenced by Canaanite, Babylonian, and eventually Iranian sources. The destruction of the First Temple and the Babylonian conquest marked the end of the first great chapter in Palestine's history. The land that had seen the rise of Bronze Age city-states, the emergence of the Israelite and Judahite kingdoms, and the development of early Judaism now faced a new era under foreign rule. Yet the seeds of return and restoration were already being planted in the exiled communities of Babylon, setting the stage for the next chapter in Palestine's long and complex history. The destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE marked not an ending, but a transformation. As smoke rose from the ruins of Solomon's temple, the Jewish elite found themselves in the sophisticated cities of Babylon, one of the ancient world's great cultural hubs. This exile would fundamentally reshape not only Judaism, but the entire character of Palestine itself. Babylon was a cosmopolitan center where local Jewish elites were allowed to trade and purchase land. While in exile, they encountered Babylonian intellectual traditions, resulting in a cultural cross-pollination that revolutionized Jewish religion through the innovations of Jewish priests and judges. Judaism emerged from this period rigidly monotheistic, having evolved into something more recognizable as the Judaism known today. The coming of the Persian Achaemenid Empire to the Levant under Cyrus the Great allowed the exiled elites to return and consolidate local rule in Palestine. Called a Messiah in the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus allowed the return of the elites in 538 BCE and is celebrated for this in Jewish tradition. During this era, the name Palestine first appears in Herodotus's histories to describe at least the coastal region. The Second Temple of Jerusalem was built during this period, serving as the center of a now fully monotheistic faith with elaborate rituals such as Yom Kippur, where the divine name of Yahweh was uttered in the Holy of Holies within the temple. While not celebrated in exactly the same way, this festival survives in Judaism to this day. testament to the antiquity of the Jewish tradition. Judaism's theology underwent a major shift during Persian rule, as Zoroastrianism's moral and dualistic cosmology gave birth to notions of angels and demons within Jewish religion. In Palestine itself, Persian satraps cooperated with local Jewish and Canaanite elites to rule the region. The Persians maintained a policy of religious tolerance and preferred to rule their outlying territories through native intermediaries. By this time, the Philistine Confederacy of Pentapolis was no more, likely destroyed after the Babylonian Empire's conquest and incorporated into the Persian Empire's administrative apparatus. Another intriguing development during this period was the emergence of the Samaritans, cousins to the Jews. This sect claims descent from the Kingdom of Israel, like the Jews, and maintains its own version of sacred texts and laws. They conduct rituals including sacrifices on Mount Gerizim. Trade played a significant role during this period, as various cities and peoples competed for trading privileges, including the Phoenicians to the north and the Kedarites in the south. In the 4th century BCE, the armies of Alexander the Great marched into Palestine after devastating Tyre on their way to Egypt. In Jewish legends, the Macedonian world conqueror is said to have prostrated before the high priest of the Second Temple upon arriving in Jerusalem, though this may be propaganda. After Alexander's death and his empire's fragmentation, the Wars of the Diadochi began. During this time, the kingdom of Nabatea, ruled by northern Arabian peoples, took control of the southern Levant around the Negev desert. The north was initially controlled by the Ptolemies, then by the Seleucids, two Hellenistic kingdoms ruled by Greek-speaking elites based in Egypt and Syria respectively. Judaism and Hellenism became complex frenemies. Just as Babylonian and Persian religion had influenced Judaism before, Hellenistic philosophy now shaped Jewish thought, as did Greek theatre on biblical tales. The cultural influence that the Hellenistic Seleucids exerted over Judea soon caused a cultural schism between more Hellenized Jews and more conservative Jews. This, alongside issues such as the Seleucid king Antiochus IV attempting to extract money from the Second Temple, caused the Maccabean revolt in 161 BCE. This revolt, which was also a civil war between Hellenized and traditional Jews, this dynasty was initially a powerful regional player, asserting independence from the Seleucids and even conquering Edom, supposedly converting the region to Judaism. Eventually, the Hasmonean dynasty was replaced by the Herodian kingdom. This kingdom, ruled by Herod the Great, eventually became part of the Roman Empire after over 2 centuries of on-and-off vassalage between the Ptolemies, Seleucids, Parthians, and eventually the Romans. The Roman period proved seminal for Judea and the world. New Jewish factions had appeared in the previous period: the Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, and Essenes. Eventually, Hellenistic and Jewish thought, continuously in conflict and dialogue, produced 2 new religious movements. One was Rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that dominates today and places emphasis on legal and ritual obligations. The other was early Christianity, whose founding figure, Jesus of Nazareth, was educated in these very rabbinical circles, as evidenced by his knowledge of Jewish law, or halakha, in the New Testament. The Nabatean kingdom continued to thrive as a hub of Arabian and Hellenistic culture, while the Herodian dynasty splintered into the Herodian Tetrarchy. Judaism continued to be present in the region as Christianity grew, but after the Jewish revolt of 66 CE and bloody battles like the one fought at Masada Fortress, the Romans ethnically cleansed parts of Judea-Palestine of its Jewish populations. The Jewish diaspora, already present since the Babylonian exile and further grown through trade in the Roman Empire, was already more populous and received additional numbers in various Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cities. Despite their losses, the Jewish people continued to rebel against the Romans, such as in the Kitos War of 115 to 117 CE, and eventually the Bar Kokhba Revolt of 132 to 136 CE, compelling the Romans to continue their crackdowns and ethnic cleansing of Jews in the region. Contrary to popular belief, there is no definitive evidence that Hadrian forcibly changed the region's name from Judea to Syria Palestina. It is more likely that the names Judea and Palestina had coexisted in the region for centuries, with Palestine becoming more dominant after the Jewish revolts. However, despite the demographic impact of Roman rule in Palestine, Rabbinic Judaism survived in the region and remained active in judicial and communal debates among Jewish communities. As late Roman antiquity dawned upon Palestine, increasing numbers of Christians of various sects changed the region's religious and cultural ecosystem alongside the Jewish community that continued to exist there. By the time of Constantine, Palestine was as diverse as it had been in the Bronze Age, with Jews, Samaritans, pagans, Gnostics, and Christians living side by side in a tapestry of Greek, Egyptian, Semitic, Jewish, and Near Eastern cultural influences. The Eastern Roman Empire, which survived into the Middle Ages after the fall of its Western counterpart, established three separate provinces: Palestina Prima, Palestina Secunda, and Palestina Salutaris, controlling the local territories from Constantine's reign to the Arab conquest, with a brief Sasanian interregnum in the 600s. Constantine's conversion to Christianity and the Christianization of the empire brought dramatic changes to Palestine. The construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the development of Christian pilgrimage transformed Jerusalem into a major Christian centre. Monasticism flourished in the Judean desert, and the translation of the Bible into local languages spread Christian influence throughout the region. Despite the Christianization of the empire, Jewish communities persisted throughout Palestine. Jews were generally banned from Jerusalem except on Tisha B'Av, the day commemorating the destruction of the temple. Occasional persecution and forced conversions occurred, but Jewish life. The Persian invasion of 614 CE brought temporary relief for some Jewish communities, as Persian forces, supported by some local Jews, conquered much of Palestine from the Byzantines. The Sassanid conquest resulted in the deaths of an estimated 26,000 Christians and the destruction of many churches, including the Holy Sepulchre. However, the Persian occupation was brief. In 628 CE, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius reconquered Palestine, restored the True Cross to Jerusalem, and initiated persecution of Jews for their alleged collaboration with the Persians. This weakening of both empires through constant warfare would prove crucial, as it left the region vulnerable to the next great transformation that was already stirring in the Arabian Peninsula. By the early 7th century, Palestine had experienced nearly a millennium of foreign rule. The land had been shaped by Persian administrative practices, Hellenistic cultural influences, Roman legal systems, and Christian religious transformation. Yet through all these changes, the diverse communities of Palestine, Jewish, Samaritan, Christian, and pagan, had maintained their distinct identities while adapting to successive imperial overlords. The stage was now set for another dramatic transformation. As Byzantine and Persian forces exhausted themselves in their final conflicts, a new power was emerging from the south. The message of Islam carried by Arab armies would soon reach the walls of Jerusalem, bringing yet another chapter to Palestine's complex history. In the scorching heat of August 636 CE, two armies faced each other across the dusty plains of Yarmouk. On one side stood the disciplined legions of Byzantium, heirs to 1,000 years of Roman military tradition. On the other, the swift cavalry of the Arab tribes, united under the banner of a new faith that had emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. The outcome of this battle would determine not just the fate of Palestine, but the entire course of Middle Eastern history. The story of Islam's arrival in Palestine begins not with conquest, but with a miraculous night journey. According to Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad was transported from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the farthest mosque, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem, from where he ascended to heaven. This event, known as the Isra and Miraj, established Jerusalem's sacred status in Islam from the religion's earliest days. The Quran refers to Palestine as Al-Ard al-Muqaddasah, the Holy Land, connecting the new faith to the ancient traditions of the region. When Muhammad died in 632 CE, his successors, the Rashidun Caliphs, began expanding beyond the Arabian Peninsula with remarkable speed and success. The Byzantine Empire, exhausted by decades of warfare with Persia, proved unable to resist the Arab advance. At the Battle of Yarmouk, the brilliant tactics of Khalid ibn al-Walid, known as Sayf Allah al-Maslul, the drawn sword of God, shattered Byzantine resistance. The victory opened the path to Jerusalem and all of Palestine. The conquest of Jerusalem itself was notably peaceful. In 638 CE, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab personally travelled to the city to receive its surrender from the Byzantine Patriarch Sophronius. The Pact of Umar, as this agreement became known, guaranteed the safety and religious freedom of Jerusalem's Christian population. Jews who had been largely banned from the city under Byzantine rule were once again permitted to live and worship in Jerusalem. Umar's first act upon entering the city was to clear the Temple Mount, which had been used as a garbage dump by the Byzantines. He ordered the construction of a simple wooden mosque on the site, laying the foundation for what would become the magnificent Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, with its capital in Damascus, Palestine experienced unprecedented prosperity and architectural achievement. The Umayyad caliphs, particularly Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, invested heavily in Palestine, seeing it as a crucial part of their empire's heartland. The construction of the Dome of the Rock, completed in 691 CE, stands as one of the greatest architectural achievements in human history. This magnificent octagonal structure, with its golden dome and intricate mosaics, was not merely a religious building, but a political statement. Its inscriptions, taken from the Quran, subtly challenged Christian doctrines while affirming Islamic monotheism. The Dome of the Rock was complemented by the construction of Al-Aqsa Mosque, creating a vast religious complex on the Temple Mount that could accommodate thousands of worshippers. These buildings transformed Jerusalem's skyline and established the city as Islam's third holiest site, after Mecca and Medina. The Umayyad period saw remarkable religious tolerance and cultural synthesis. Christians continued to serve in high administrative positions, Jewish communities flourished, and Samaritans maintained their ancient traditions. The Arabic language gradually became the lingua franca of administration and commerce, though local languages and customs persisted. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals a thriving economy based on agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship. Palestinian olive oil, soap, and textiles were exported throughout the Islamic world. The famous Nablus soap, made from local olive oil and ash, became renowned from Spain to Central Asia. Cities like Ramla, founded by the Umayyads as an administrative capital, grew rapidly. Gaza flourished as a major port connecting Palestine to Egypt and the broader Mediterranean world. Jerusalem, while maintaining its religious significance, also became an important centre of Islamic learning and jurisprudence. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE brought significant changes to Palestine. With the Caliphate's capital moved from Damascus to Baghdad, Palestine found itself on the periphery rather than at the center of Islamic power. However, this did not diminish the region's prosperity or significance. Under Abbasid rule, Palestine became increasingly integrated into the broader Islamic world's intellectual and commercial networks. Scholars from Palestine traveled to Baghdad's House of Wisdom, while students from across the Islamic world came to study in Jerusalem's religious schools. The Abbasid period saw the development of sophisticated agricultural techniques, including the introduction of new crops from Asia and Africa. Sugarcane, cotton, and various fruits transformed Palestine's agricultural landscape. The famous terraced hillsides that still characterize much of the Palestinian landscape were largely developed during this period. Trade flourished under Abbasid rule. Palestinian merchants established networks stretching from Spain to India, dealing in everything from spices and silk to manuscripts and precious stones. The port cities of Gaza, Ascalon and Acre became major commercial hubs, while inland cities like Nablus and Hebron prospered as manufacturing centers. The early Islamic period in Palestine was marked by remarkable cultural creativity and religious development. The region became a meeting point where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish traditions interacted and influenced each other. Islamic scholarship flourished in Palestine during this period. The Al-Aqsa Mosque became a major center of Islamic learning, attracting scholars from across the Muslim world. Legal schools developed distinctive Palestinian characteristics, and local scholars made significant contributions to Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and philosophy. Christian communities adapted to Islamic rule while maintaining their distinct identity. Many Christians learned Arabic and participated in the broader Islamic cultural renaissance. Some Christian scholars translated Greek philosophical and scientific works into Arabic, contributing to the preservation and transmission of classical knowledge. Jewish communities experienced a renaissance under early Islamic rule. After centuries of persecution under Byzantine rule, Jews found new opportunities in the Islamic world. Jewish scholars in Palestine contributed to the development of Hebrew poetry, biblical commentary, and Jewish law. The Canaanite movement, which rejected rabbinic authority in favor of direct interpretation of scripture, found particular support in Palestine. The Samaritan community, though much reduced from its ancient size, continued to maintain its unique traditions. Samaritan scholars produced important works on their history and religious practices, many of which survive to this day. The early Islamic period brought unprecedented economic prosperity to Palestine. The region's strategic location between the Islamic heartlands and the Mediterranean made it a crucial link in international trade networks. Agriculture formed the backbone of Palestine's economy. The Islamic agricultural revolution introduced new crops, improved irrigation techniques, and more efficient farming methods. The famous Palestinian olive groves expanded significantly during this period, and olive oil became one of the region's most important exports. Manufacturing also flourished. Palestinian craftsmen became renowned for their skill in producing soap, textiles, glassware, and metalwork. The soap industry of Nablus, based on local olive oil, became particularly famous and profitable. Urban centers grew rapidly during this period. The development of sophisticated financial instruments, including letters of credit and banking networks, facilitated long-distance trade. Palestinian merchants established trading houses in cities from Cordoba to Samarkand, creating wealth that funded the construction of mosques, schools, and other public buildings. In 969 CE, Palestine came under the rule of the Fatimid Caliphate, based in Cairo. The Fatimids, who claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima, brought Shiite rule to a predominantly Sunni region. However, Their rule was generally tolerant and pragmatic. Under Fatimid rule, Palestine continued to prosper economically and culturally. The Fatimids invested heavily in trade and commerce, and Palestinian merchants benefited from improved access to Indian Ocean trade routes through Egypt. The Fatimid period saw continued religious tolerance. Christians and Jews maintained their communities and institutions, while Sunni Muslims were generally left undisturbed in their religious practices. This tolerance extended to various Islamic sects and schools of thought, creating a diverse and vibrant religious landscape. Jerusalem remained a major pilgrimage destination for Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. The Fatimids maintained and improved the city's religious buildings, including renovations to the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Christian pilgrimage to the Holy Land continued, bringing both religious significance and economic benefit to the region. On a scorching July morning in 1099, the walls of Jerusalem echoed with the clash of steel and the cries of battle. After 3 years of marching across Europe and Anatolia, the armies of the First Crusade had finally reached their ultimate goal, the Holy City. What followed would be remembered as one of history's most brutal conquests, marking the beginning of 2 centuries of conflict that would reshape Palestine and leave scars lasting to this day. The call to crusade had originated in the papal court of Urban II in 1095. Responding to a request for aid from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I, the Pope proclaimed a holy war to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. Deus vult, God wills it, became the battle cry that echoed across Western Europe as nobles, knights, and common people took up the cross. The First Crusade was unlike anything the Islamic world had experienced. Previous Christian-Muslim conflicts had been largely political or territorial. This was different, a religiously motivated war of conquest that combined spiritual fervour with military ambition. The Crusader armies that reached Palestine in 1099 were hardened by 3 years of warfare. They had captured Antioch after a grueling siege and had learned to adapt their European fighting techniques to Middle Eastern conditions. When they reached Jerusalem, they found a city defended by a Fatimid garrison under the command of Iftikhar al-Dawla. The siege of Jerusalem lasted 5 weeks. The Crusaders constructed massive siege towers and employed sophisticated military engineering. On July 15, 1099, they breached the walls near Herod's Gate. What followed was a massacre that shocked even medieval sensibilities. Contemporary accounts describe scenes of unimaginable brutality. Raymond of Aguilera, a Crusader chronicler, wrote, "Men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. Indeed, it was a just and splendid judgment of God that this place should be filled with the blood of the unbelievers." Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir recorded, "The population of the holy city was put to the sword, and the Franks spent a week massacring Muslims." Modern estimates suggest that between 10,000 and 70,000 people were killed in the conquest of Jerusalem. The Jewish community, which had fought alongside the Muslims in defending the city, was burned alive in their synagogue. The massacre sent shockwaves throughout the Islamic world and created a legacy of bitterness that would influence Christian-Muslim relations for centuries. Following their conquest of Jerusalem, the Crusaders established 4 states in the Levant: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa, and the County of Tripoli. These became known collectively as Outremer, the land beyond the sea. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, stretching from Beirut to the Red Sea, became the most important of these states. Godfrey of Bouillon, one of the Crusades' leaders, became its first ruler, though he refused the title of king, preferring to be called Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. His brother Baldwin I, who succeeded him in 1100, had no such qualms about royal titles and established the kingdom on a firm footing. The Crusader states faced enormous challenges from the beginning. They were surrounded by hostile Muslim territories, dependent on reinforcements and supplies from Europe, and ruled by a small Frankish minority over a predominantly Muslim and Eastern Christian population. To address these challenges, the Crusaders developed innovative military and administrative solutions. The most famous of these were the military orders, the Knights Templar, founded in 1119, and the Knights Hospitaller, which evolved from a medical order into a military one. These orders combined monastic vows with military service, creating elite fighting forces that became the backbone of Crusader defence. The Templars, taking their name from their headquarters near the Temple Mount, became legendary for their discipline and fighting prowess. Their rules stated, "To each knight are assigned 3 horses and 1 squire, and if the squire wishes to bring more horses, he may do so with the permission of the master." These warrior monks took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet collectively amassed enormous wealth and political influence. The Crusaders also constructed an impressive network of fortifications across Palestine. Castles like Crac des Chevaliers, Belvoir and Montfort represented the pinnacle of medieval military architecture. These massive stone fortresses, with their concentric walls, towers, and sophisticated defensive features, allowed small garrisons to control large territories and withstand prolonged sieges. Despite the religious rhetoric and military conflicts, daily life in Crusader Palestine was characterized by remarkable cultural exchange and coexistence. The Frankish settlers, numbering perhaps 120,000 at their peak, ruled over a population of roughly 350,000 Muslims, Eastern Christians and Jews. The Arab chronicler Usama ibn Munkid, who spent considerable time in Crusader territories, observed, "Among the Franks there are some who have become acclimatized and have associated long with the Muslims. These are much better than the recent comas from the Frankish lands." This distinction between established Crusader families and new arrivals from Europe became increasingly important as the decades passed. Intermarriage between Frankish nobles and local Christian families was common, creating a unique Levantine nobility that blended European and Middle Eastern traditions. The Crusader courts adopted local customs, foods, and even clothing styles. Many Frankish nobles learned Arabic and employed Muslim administrators and advisors. Trade flourished despite the military conflicts. Muslim merchants continued to do business in Crusader ports, while Frankish traders established networks throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Italian maritime republics, Venice, Pisa, and Genoa, established permanent trading posts in Crusader cities, creating wealth that funded both military campaigns and cultural exchange. The architectural legacy of this period reflects this cultural synthesis. Crusader churches incorporated Islamic architectural elements, while Muslim buildings in Crusader territories sometimes adopted European features. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was extensively rebuilt during this period, combining Romanesque and Byzantine styles with local traditions. The initial Muslim response to the Crusader conquest was fragmented and ineffective. The Islamic world was divided between the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo, and various Turkish emirates in Syria and Anatolia. This disunity allowed the Crusaders to establish and consolidate their states. However, the concept of jihad, holy war in defense of Islam, gradually gained momentum as a response to the Crusader presence. Imad ad-Din Zengi, the Turkish Atabeg of Mosul and Aleppo, became the first Muslim leader to effectively organise resistance to the Crusaders. In 1144, he captured Edessa, the first Crusader state to fall, sending shockwaves through Western Europe and prompting the Second Crusade. Zengi's son, Nur ad-Din, continued his father's work with even greater success. Nur ad-Din understood that military victory alone was insufficient. He also needed to present himself as the champion of Islamic orthodoxy and unity. He promoted the ideology of jihad while working to unify the fractured Muslim territories of Syria and northern Mesopotamia. Nur ad-Din's greatest achievement was his conquest of Damascus in 1154, which brought most of Muslim Syria under his control. He also promoted religious and educational reforms, founding madrasas, religious schools, and promoting Sunni orthodoxy. His court became a centre of Islamic learning and culture, attracting scholars and poets from across the Muslim world. The most famous Muslim leader of the Crusader period was Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin. A Kurdish military commander who had served under Nur ad-Din, Saladin rose to power in Egypt in 1169, initially as vizier to the last Fatimid caliph. Saladin's rise to power was marked by political brilliance as much as military skill. After the death of the last Fatimid caliph in 1171, he abolished the Shiite Caliphate and restored Egypt to Sunni orthodoxy, nominally under the authority of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. This move won him support from Sunni Muslims throughout the region. Following Nur ad-Din's death in 1174, Saladin moved to unite Egypt and Syria under his rule. This process took over a decade and involved as much diplomacy as warfare. Saladin presented himself as the heir to Nur ad-Din's legacy and the champion of Islamic unity against the Crusader threat. Saladin's character impressed even his enemies. He was known for his personal piety, his generosity to the poor, and his chivalrous treatment of prisoners and non-combatants. These qualities, combined with his military and political successes, made him a legendary figure in both Islamic and Western traditions. Contemporary sources reveal Saladin's strategic thinking. He wrote, "I have not slept one night in comfort, nor have I eaten one meal with pleasure since the Franks took Jerusalem." This statement, whether literally true or not, captures his single-minded focus on reclaiming the Holy City. The decisive confrontation between Saladin and the Crusaders came at the Battle of Hattin on July 4th, 1187. The battle was the culmination of a carefully planned campaign by Saladin to draw the Crusader army away from its fortified positions and into the open field. The immediate cause of the battle was a raid by Raynald of Chatillon, the Lord of Kerak, against a Muslim caravan. Raynald, known for his aggressive and often reckless behaviour, had repeatedly violated truces with Saladin. When he allegedly captured Saladin's sister in one of these raids, it provided the perfect pretext for war. King Guy of Lusignan, the weak and indecisive ruler of Jerusalem, was pressured by his nobles to respond to Saladin's invasion of the Galilee. Against the advice of experienced commanders like Raymond of Tripoli, Guy decided to march his entire army to relieve the besieged fortress of Tiberias. Saladin's strategy was masterful. He positioned his forces to cut off the Crusader army from water sources while subjecting them to constant harassment by mounted archers. The Crusaders, weighed down by heavy armour and suffering from thirst in the July heat, became increasingly desperate. The battle itself was a catastrophe for the Crusaders. Trapped on the horns of Hattin, a double-peaked hill near the Sea of Galilee, the Crusader army was systematically destroyed. King Guy was captured, along with most of his nobles, and the relic of the True Cross, which had been carried into battle. Ibn al-Athir described the aftermath. This was the most severe blow that the Muslims inflicted on the Franks since they conquered the coast. The victory at Hattin opened the way for Saladin's reconquest of most Crusader territories, including Jerusalem itself. On October 2nd, 1187, after a brief siege, Jerusalem surrendered to Saladin. The contrast with the Crusader conquest of 1099 could not have been more stark. Where the Crusaders had massacred the city's population, Saladin showed remarkable restraint and mercy. Saladin initially threatened to treat the city as the Crusaders had in 1099, but he was persuaded by the city's defender, Balian of Ibelin, to accept a negotiated surrender. The terms were generous. Christians could leave safely upon payment of a ransom, and those who could not pay would be allowed to depart anyway. Saladin personally paid the ransoms for many poor Christians and provided safe conduct to the coast. The Muslim chronicler Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani recorded Saladin's orders regarding the Dome of the Rock. Saladin ordered that the crosses on top of the cupola be cast down, and the Templars had adorned the outside with marble, which they had covered with gold so that it caught the rays of the sun and could be seen from a great distance. This was all cleaned off. The recapture of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through Western Europe and prompted the Third Crusade, led by three of Europe's most powerful monarchs: Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip II Augustus of France, and Richard I the Lionheart of England. The Third Crusade represented the high watermark of Crusader military effort. The arrival of Richard the Lionheart in particular brought new energy and tactical innovation to the Crusader cause. The Siege of Acre became the focal point of the Third Crusade. This 2-year siege involved some of the largest armies ever assembled in the medieval Middle East. The city's eventual fall to the Crusaders was marked by controversy when Richard ordered the massacre of 2,700 Muslim prisoners, an act that tarnished his reputation even among his own followers. The relationship between Richard and Saladin became the stuff of legend. Despite being enemies, they developed a mutual respect that was unusual for the period. Richard reportedly said of Saladin, "He is the greatest and most powerful leader in Islam, and beyond doubt the most merciful." Saladin, for his part, praised Richard's courage and military skill. The Battle of Arsuf, September 7th, 1191, demonstrated Richard's tactical brilliance. Facing Saladin's mobile army, Richard maintained strict discipline among his troops, absorbing repeated cavalry charges before launching a devastating counterattack that scattered the Muslim forces. However, Richard's ultimate goal, the recapture of Jerusalem, proved beyond his reach. Two factors prevented this: the enormous logistical challenges of besieging such a well-fortified city so far from the coast, and the political situation in England, which demanded Richard's return. The Third Crusade ended not with a decisive battle, but with a negotiated settlement. The Treaty of Ramla, signed on September 2nd, 1192, established a 3-year truce and defined the boundaries between Crusader and Muslim territories. Under the treaty's terms, the Crusaders retained control of a coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa, while Saladin kept Jerusalem and the interior. Crucially, the treaty guaranteed Christian pilgrimage rights to Jerusalem, allowing unarmed pilgrims to visit the holy sites. The treaty text stated, "There shall be peace between the Muslims and the Franks in all the land." This phrase captured the war-weariness of both sides and their recognition that neither could achieve total victory. Richard's departure from the Holy Land in October 1192 marked the end of the most famous phase of the Crusades. He never returned to Palestine, dying in France in 1199 from a crossbow wound received while besieging a minor castle. Saladin's death in 1193 led to the fragmentation of his empire among his sons and brothers, weakening Muslim resistance to future Crusader expeditions. The Fourth Crusade was diverted to Constantinople, where the Crusaders sacked the Byzantine capital, but subsequent expeditions did target the Holy Land. The Fifth Crusade focused on Egypt, recognizing that control of the Nile Delta was key to controlling Palestine. The Crusaders captured Damietta, but were ultimately forced to withdraw after their advance on Cairo was halted by flooding. The Sixth Crusade was unique in that it was led by the excommunicated Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who achieved through diplomacy what his predecessors had failed to accomplish through warfare. Frederick negotiated with Saladin's nephew, Al-Kamil, and secured the return of Jerusalem to Christian control for 10 years. Frederick's success was temporary. In 1244, Jerusalem was recaptured by Khwarezmian Turks, allied with the Ayyubids, and the city's Christian population was massacred. The Battle of La Fourby later that year saw the destruction of the largest Crusader army ever assembled, effectively ending Crusader hopes of reconquering Jerusalem. The final chapter of the Crusader presence in Palestine was written by the Mamluks, the slave soldier dynasty that had overthrown the Ayyubids in Egypt. Under sultans like Baybars I and Al-Ashraf Khalil, the Mamluks systematically conquered the remaining Crusader strongholds. Baybars, known as al-Bundukdari, the crossbow, was a master of siege warfare and psychological intimidation. His letter to the Prince of Antioch, after capturing that city in 1268, gives a sense of his methods. You would have seen your knights prostrate beneath the horses' hooves, your houses stormed by pillagers, your women sold 4 at a time and bought for a dinar of your own money. The fall of Acre on May 18, 1291, marked the end of the Crusader states. Al-Ashraf Khalil ordered the city to be razed to the ground, so that should the Franks return, they would find no foothold there. The last Crusader strongholds fell shortly afterward, ending nearly 2 centuries of Frankish rule in the Levant. The Crusader period left an indelible mark on Palestine and the broader Middle East. The physical legacy is still visible today in the massive castle ruins that dot the landscape, and in the architectural influences that can be seen in both Christian and Muslim buildings. More importantly, the Crusades fundamentally altered the relationship between Christianity and Islam. The initial massacre at Jerusalem in 1099 created a legacy of bitterness, while the subsequent period of coexistence demonstrated the possibility of peaceful interaction between the faiths. The Crusades also had profound effects on European society, introducing new ideas, technologies, and goods from the East. The military orders pioneered new forms of banking and finance, while the cultural exchanges of the Crusader period contributed to the European Renaissance. For the Islamic world, the Crusades strengthened the concept of jihad and contributed to the eventual unification of Egypt and Syria under single rulers. The period also saw a flowering of Islamic culture and learning, as rulers like Nur ad-Din and Saladin patronised scholars and artists. Perhaps most significantly, the Crusader period established patterns of conflict and coexistence that would influence the region for centuries to come. The memory of the Crusades would be invoked by later rulers and movements, while the example of leaders like Saladin would inspire future generations of Muslim leaders. As the last Crusader ship disappeared over the Mediterranean horizon in 1291, Palestine entered a new phase of its history under Mamluk rule. The age of the Crusades was over, but its legacy would continue to shape the Holy Land for centuries to come. In the winter of 1516, as snow fell on the Anatolian highlands, Sultan Selim I the Grim prepared for a campaign that would reshape the Middle East. His target was not the familiar enemy of Christian Europe, but his fellow Muslims, the Mamluk Sultanate that had ruled Egypt and the Levant for over 2 centuries. By the time the campaign ended, Palestine would begin 4 centuries under Ottoman rule, an era that would see the land transform from a medieval backwater into a province of one of the world's great empires. The Battle of Marj Dabik on August 24, 1516, marked the end of Mamluk rule in the Levant. Sultan Kansu al-Gawri, the ageing Mamluk ruler, died on the battlefield as his traditional cavalry was shattered by Ottoman firearms and disciplined Janissary infantry. The victory demonstrated the military revolution that had made the Ottomans the dominant power in the Islamic world. Selim I's conquest was driven by both strategic and religious considerations. The Mamluks had allied with the Safavid Persians, the Ottomans' Shiite rivals, making them enemies of the Sunni Ottoman state. Moreover, control of the Levant would give the Ottomans dominion over the pilgrimage routes to Mecca and Medina, enhancing their claim to leadership of the Islamic world. The conquest of Jerusalem in December 1516 was notably peaceful. The city's notables, recognizing the futility of resistance, opened the gates to the Ottoman forces. An Ottoman chronicler recorded, "The holy city opened its gates to the commander of the faithful without resistance, as if welcoming a long-awaited liberator." Selim I's approach to governing his new territories reflected Ottoman administrative genius. Rather than imposing wholesale changes, he adapted existing systems while integrating them into the broader Ottoman framework. Palestine was divided into sanjaks of Jerusalem, Gaza, and Safad, all part of the Damascus Eyalet. The famous Ottoman millet system granted religious autonomy to Christians and Jews, allowing them to govern their internal affairs according to their own laws and customs. "In my state, the Christians shall be as safe as in their mother's arms," Selim I proclaimed, establishing a policy of religious tolerance that would characterize much of Ottoman rule in Palestine. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent marked the zenith of Ottoman power and brought unprecedented prosperity to Palestine. Known in the Islamic world as Suleiman al-Qanuni, he combined military conquest with administrative reform and architectural patronage. Suleiman's most visible legacy in Palestine was the reconstruction of Jerusalem's walls between 1537 and 1541. These magnificent fortifications, which still define the old city today, were built not for military purposes. Jerusalem was no longer a frontier city, but as a symbol of Ottoman grandeur and Islamic piety. The walls incorporated 7 gates, with an 8th sealed according to Jewish and Islamic traditions regarding the Day of Judgment. "I have rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem for the honour of Islam and the protection of the faithful," Suleiman declared, though protection was less important than prestige in this peaceful era. The Dome of the Rock received extensive renovations during Suleiman's reign, including the beautiful blue and white tilework that adorns its exterior today. Calligraphic inscriptions were renewed, proclaiming, "There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." These renovations transformed the dome into one of the world's most beautiful buildings, a fitting crown jewel for the Ottoman Empire's holiest city, after Mecca and Medina. The Ottoman millet system created a unique form of religious pluralism in Palestine. Each religious community was granted autonomy over its internal affairs, including marriage, divorce, inheritance, and religious education. This system allowed diverse communities to coexist while maintaining their distinct identities. The Muslim majority followed the Hanafi school of Islamic law, which was the official legal tradition of the Ottoman Empire. A qadi appointed from Istanbul administered Islamic law, while a local mufti provided religious guidance. As Ottoman law stated, "The Sultan is the shadow of Allah on earth and the refuge of all the people in the world." Christian communities flourished under Ottoman rule, often enjoying more freedom than they had experienced under previous Crusader or Mamluk administrations. The Greek Orthodox community, centered around the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, formed the largest Christian denomination. Armenian Apostolic Christians, though smaller in number, became vital players in trade and crafts. Meanwhile, Latin Catholics maintained their presence through the Franciscan custody of the Holy Land, which had been established during the Crusader period, but now operated under Ottoman protection. Under the Turk, "We enjoy more freedom than we ever did under the Latins," noted a Franciscan chronicler, reflecting the Ottoman policy of religious tolerance that contrasted sharply with the religious wars then ravaging Europe. The Jewish community experienced a remarkable renaissance during this period. Sephardic Jews, expelled from Spain in 1492, found refuge throughout the Ottoman Empire, bringing advanced knowledge of medicine, printing, and commerce to Palestine. They were joined by smaller Ashkenazi communities from Eastern Europe, all finding new opportunities in Ottoman Palestine. Safed emerged as a major centre of Jewish mysticism during the 16th century. Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari, developed revolutionary forms of Kabbalistic thought that would influence Jewish spirituality worldwide. In the same city, Rabbi Joseph Caro authored the Shulchan Aruch, which became the standard code of Jewish law. As he wrote, "The heir of the land of Israel makes one wise." The early Ottoman period brought unprecedented economic prosperity to Palestine, integrating it into vast trade networks that stretched from the Balkans to the Indian Ocean. The Damascus-Cairo caravan route, passing directly through Palestine, became one of the empire's most important commercial arteries. Impressive stone caravanserais were constructed at regular intervals, serving as hotels, warehouses, and trading centres, many of which survive today as testaments to this golden age of commerce. Mediterranean ports like Jaffa, Haifa, and Acre thrived as export hubs. Palestinian olive oil, soap, cotton, and citrus fruits found eager markets throughout the empire and beyond. An Ottoman tax register proudly noted, "The revenues of Jerusalem Sanjak have increased threefold since the conquest." Agricultural development transformed the landscape. Olive groves expanded across the hill country, providing raw material for Palestine's renowned soap industry. Nablus became the epicenter of soap production, its distinctive olive oil-based products reaching markets from Istanbul to Venice. Cotton cultivation in the coastal plain supplied textile workshops in Damascus and Aleppo, while the nascent citrus export trade to Europe laid foundations for what would become one of Palestine's defining industries. The Ottomans invested heavily in infrastructure, improving roads, constructing bridges, and establishing postal systems that bound Palestine ever more closely to the broader Ottoman world. Suleiman the Magnificent's death in 1566 marked a turning point, as the empire faced mounting challenges from European powers, internal rebellions, and economic difficulties. Central authority weakened the Dev Shirma system, which had recruited Christian boys for the elite Janissary Corps and Ottoman administration, was abandoned in the late 16th century. The Janissaries transformed into a hereditary caste, more interested in protecting their privileges than serving the state. The empire that once struck fear into the hearts of kings now struggles to collect taxes from its own subjects, lamented an Ottoman historian, capturing the spirit of decline. In Palestine, this vacuum of central authority gave rise to local strongmen known as Ayyan. The most remarkable was Zahir al-Umar, who ruled the Galilee from 1750 to 1775. Operating from his base in Acre, Zahir transformed the city into a major commercial centre while asserting virtual independence from Istanbul. He rebuilt Acre's fortifications, courted European merchants, and promoted agricultural development. "I am the master of this land and Istanbul is far away," Zahir reportedly declared, embodying the era's spirit of local autonomy. His successor, Ahmad Pasha al-Jaza, continued these policies despite his fearsome nickname, proving an effective administrator from 1775 to 1804. Al-Jaza's finest hour came in 1799 when he successfully defended Acre against Napoleon's siege, effectively ending the French emperor's eastern ambitions. Yet this period also brought significant hardships. Bedouin tribes from the Arabian Peninsula increasingly raided settled areas during periods of weak authority, disrupting agriculture and forcing villagers to abandon their homes. Urban centres shrank as commerce declined and security deteriorated. The once fertile plains lie waste, and the villages are abandoned to jackals, observed a French consul. European commercial penetration further undermined local prosperity. The capitulation system granted European merchants extraterritorial privileges and favourable trading terms, allowing cheap manufactured goods to flood Ottoman markets and destroy local crafts. European manufactures have destroyed the native industries of Palestine, noted a British consul with characteristic understatement. The most dramatic interruption of Ottoman rule came in 1831, when Muhammad Ali of Egypt, having established virtual independence, sent his son Ibrahim Pasha to conquer the Levant. This Egyptian occupation brought sweeping modernization efforts, centralized bureaucracy, modern taxation systems, and Palestine's first systematic population census. Roads improved, postal systems expanded, and telegraph lines were planned. "We shall bring the light of civilization to these backward provinces," declared an Egyptian administrator. Yet Ibrahim Pasha's policies of conscription and heavy taxation proved deeply unpopular, sparking the Palestinian peasant revolt of 1834. "We will not give our sons to die in foreign wars," declared a rebel leader, capturing the widespread resistance to Egyptian reforms. The occupation ended in 1840 when European powers, concerned about Mediterranean balance of power, forced Muhammad Ali's withdrawal. Lord Palmerston explained, "The integrity of the Ottoman Empire is essential to European balance." The restoration of Ottoman rule coincided with the Tanzimat period, the empire's ambitious attempt at comprehensive reform. The Hat-i-Sharif of Gulhan and the Hatti-Humayun promised revolutionary changes: equality before the law, regardless of religion, security of life and property, and fair taxation. These imperial concessions extend to all our subjects, whatever religion or sect they may belong to, proclaimed the Hatti-Sharif, marking a radical departure from traditional Islamic governance. The Land Law of 1858 proved particularly consequential, establishing private property rights through the tapu system. This fundamentally altered land tenure patterns and would later facilitate Jewish land purchases by creating a legal framework for agricultural land sales. "The land shall belong to those who can prove ownership and pay taxes," explained an Ottoman official. Municipal councils emerged in major cities, providing limited self-governance with mixed religious membership. The Jerusalem municipality, established in 1863, symbolised this new approach to urban governance. The 19th century witnessed dramatically increased European involvement in Palestine. Consulates proliferated in Jerusalem as European powers competed for influence over holy sites and local Christian communities. "Every Christian in Palestine looks to Europe for protection," observed the British consul. Archaeological interest exploded during this period. Edward Robinson conducted systematic surveys in 1838 and 1852, while Charles Warren carried out extensive Jerusalem excavations in 1867. The Palestine Exploration Fund, established in 1865, sponsored numerous expeditions that mapped and documented ancient sites. "Every stone in Jerusalem has a story to tell," Warren wrote, capturing European fascination with Palestine's biblical heritage. Though this activity also reflected colonial attitudes that Western scholars better understood the land's significance than its current inhabitants. The final Ottoman decades witnessed organised Jewish immigration motivated by European anti-Semitism and emerging Zionist ideology. Russian pogroms following Tsar Alexander II's assassination in 1881 prompted the first Aliyah. Leo Pinska's auto-emancipation articulated the new thinking. "We must seek our own salvation in the establishment of a Jewish nationality, of a people living upon its own soil." The Hovevei Zion movement established agricultural settlements like Rishon LeZion, Zikron Yaakov, and Gedera, with crucial support from Baron Edmund de Rothschild. "I have undertaken to support the Jewish colonies in Palestine, and I shall continue to do so," he declared. These settlements faced enormous challenges: malaria, harsh conditions, and land disputes with Arab peasants. "We came to build and be built, but the land is harder than we imagined," wrote an early settler. Arab responses grew increasingly concerned. Najib Azuri presciently observed in 1905, "Two important phenomena of the same nature but opposed are emerging at this moment in Asiatic Turkey. These are the awakening of the Arab nation and the latent effort of the Jews to reconstitute on a very large scale the ancient kingdom of Israel." The second Aliyah brought young idealists committed to creating a new Jewish society based on manual labour and collective principles. Future leaders like David Ben-Gurion arrived with transformative visions. "We came to the land of Israel to build and be built by it," he wrote. Adi Gordon articulated Labour Zionist ideology. "We come to our homeland in order to be planted in our natural soil from which we have been uprooted, to strike our roots deep into its life-giving substances." This period saw the establishment of Degania in 1910 and Tel Aviv's founding in 1909 as the first modern Hebrew city. Eliezer ben Yehuda's Hebrew revival began transforming the ancient liturgical language into modern speech. Hebrew in the home, Hebrew in the school, Hebrew in the street, he proclaimed. The Hashema Self-Defense Organization, founded in 1909, reflected new Jewish emphasis on protection. Their oath declared, "I will be faithful to my people and my land until my last breath." World War I brought catastrophe to Palestine. The Ottoman alliance with Germany led to involvement in a global conflict for which the empire was unprepared. Jamal Pasha imposed harsh military rule, declaring, "I will drive the British into the sea and restore Ottoman glory." Instead, his policies brought suffering. A 1915 locust plague destroyed crops, while Ottoman requisitions and conscription devastated the economy. Foreign nationals were expelled and Jewish settlements faced suspicion. Tel Aviv was evacuated in 1917 as Jamal Pasha threatened, "I will make the Zionists forget their dreams of a Jewish state." The Arab revolt launched in June 1916 opened a new front. Sharif Hussein of Mecca proclaimed, "We have decided to sever our connection with the Turkish government and to declare the independence of the Arab nation." T.E. Lawrence served as British liaison, and the capture of Aqaba in July 1917 brought Arab forces to Palestine's doorstep. On November 2nd, 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, promising support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while protecting the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. The British conquest began with the Battle of Beersheba on October 31st, 1917, where Australian light horse captured the town in a dramatic cavalry charge. General Edmund Allenby advanced northward, entering Jerusalem on December 11th, 1917. Dismounting to enter on foot, he declared, "I enter the holy city with reverence and humility," a calculated contrast to Kaiser Wilhelm II's mounted entry in 1898. The Ottoman defeat at Megiddo in September 1918 completed the conquest. 4 centuries of Turkish rule had ended. The Ottomans bequeathed Palestine a rich architectural heritage, from Suleiman's Jerusalem walls to countless mosques, schools, and public buildings. Their administrative systems, including land registration and municipal governance, provided foundations for future development. The millet system had allowed diverse religious communities to coexist while maintaining distinct identities, creating a model of pluralism that would face severe tests ahead. Economic integration into global trade networks during Ottoman rule established agricultural techniques, commercial relationships, and urban centres crucial for Palestine's modern development. Yet this period also saw the emergence of forces that would dominate the 20th century: European colonialism, Zionist settlement, and Arab nationalism. As British forces assumed control in 1917 to 1918, they inherited not merely territory, but a complex society shaped by Ottoman governance. The challenge of administering this diverse land with its competing religious communities and emerging national movements would prove far more difficult than military conquest. The Ottoman chapter had closed, but its influence would resonate through Palestine's turbulent modern history, providing both foundation and complication for all that followed. On a crisp December morning in 1917, General Edmund Allenby walked through the Jaffa Gate into Jerusalem, becoming the first Christian ruler to enter the Holy City since the Crusades. His modest entrance on foot, carefully choreographed to contrast with Kaiser Wilhelm II's grandiose mounted procession in 1898, symbolised Britain's claim to be a different kind of imperial power. Yet within 3 decades, this same empire would abandon Palestine in chaos, leaving behind a legacy of conflicting promises, communal violence, and partition that continues to shape the region today. The British conquest of Palestine was completed with remarkable speed. Following the capture of Jerusalem in December 1917, British forces under Allenby pushed northward, defeating the Ottomans at the Battle of Megiddo in September 1918. By October, all of Palestine was under British military administration. The Occupied Enemy Territory Administration, established by the British, maintained Ottoman administrative structures while introducing British military law. Allenby's proclamation to the inhabitants of Jerusalem reflected the careful balance the British sought to maintain. Every sacred building, monument, holy spot, shrine, traditional site, endowment, pious bequest, or customary place of prayer will be maintained and protected. However, the British faced an immediate challenge. They had made contradictory promises to different groups during the war. The McMahon-Hussein correspondence had promised Arab independence, though with ambiguous boundaries. The secret Sykes-Picot Agreement had divided the Middle East between Britain and France. Most controversially, the Balfour Declaration had promised British support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. These conflicting commitments would haunt British policy throughout the Mandate period. As one British official later observed, "We have promised the same land to 2 different peoples, and now we must somehow make it work." The end of Ottoman rule unleashed powerful nationalist forces that had been developing during the final decades of Turkish administration. Both Arab and Jewish communities had clear but incompatible visions for Palestine's future. The Zionist movement, energised by the Balfour Declaration, saw British rule as an opportunity to build the Jewish national home. Chaim Weizmann, who had played a crucial role in securing the Balfour Declaration, led the Zionist Commission that arrived in Palestine in 1918. "We have come to Palestine to build, not to destroy," Weizmann declared, but his vision of building necessarily involved fundamental changes to Palestine's demographic and political structure. The Third Aliyah, 1919 to 1923, brought 35,000 Jewish immigrants to Palestine, mostly young Labour Zionists, committed to creating a new form of Jewish society based on manual labour and collective principles. The Histadrut Labour Federation, founded in 1920, became a state within a state, providing employment, healthcare, and education for the growing Jewish community. David Ben-Gurion, who would later become Israel's first prime minister, articulated the Zionist vision. "We are not coming to Palestine as guests, but as masters returning to their inheritance." The Arab response was equally determined. The First Palestine Arab Congress, convened in 1919, rejected the Balfour Declaration and demanded independence. The Congress resolution declared, "We consider Palestine as part of Arab Syria, as it has never been separated from it at any time. We are connected with it by national, religious, linguistic, natural, economic and geographical bonds." Musa Kazim al-Husseini, elected president of the Arab Executive Committee, became the leading voice of Palestinian Arab nationalism. The Arab Executive boycotted British institutions and demanded representative government, arguing that the mandate violated the principle of self-determination proclaimed by President Wilson. The collision between these competing nationalisms produced immediate violence. The Nebi Musa riots of April 1920 saw anti-Jewish violence in Jerusalem's Old City, sparked by inflammatory speeches during the traditional Muslim pilgrimage. Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who would later become Grand Mufti, was among those who incited the crowds. Ze'ev Jabotinsky organised Jewish self-defense units leading to his arrest by British authorities. A British report concluded, "The disturbances were the result of a collision between two rival nationalisms." These early clashes established patterns that would persist throughout the Mandate period. Arab fears of displacement by Jewish immigration and land purchases, Jewish determination to build their national home, regardless of Arab opposition, and British attempts to balance irreconcilable demands. The San Remo Conference of April 1920 formally awarded the Palestine Mandate to Britain, incorporating the Balfour Declaration into international law. The mandate text stated, "The mandatory shall be responsible for placing the country under such political, administrative and economic conditions as will secure the establishment of the Jewish national home." Herbert Samuel, appointed as the first High Commissioner in 1920, was himself Jewish, a choice that symbolised British commitment to the Balfour Declaration while creating suspicions among Arabs. Samuel attempted to balance competing claims, declaring, "The British government's policy is to foster the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, while ensuring that the rights of the existing population are not prejudiced." The Mandate administration established separate institutions for different communities. The Jewish Agency, recognised as the representative body of the Jewish community, developed sophisticated political and economic institutions. The Arab community, lacking unified leadership and rejecting the mandate's legitimacy, remained politically fragmented. The British introduced the Palestine pound as the official currency and established an advisory council with appointed members from different communities. However, Arab boycotts of British institutions limited the effectiveness of these arrangements. Jewish immigration to Palestine accelerated under British rule. The third Aliyah was followed by the fourth Aliyah, which brought 82,000 immigrants, mainly middle-class Jews fleeing economic difficulties in Poland and restrictions on immigration to the United States. This wave differed from earlier Labour Zionist immigration, focusing more on urban development and private enterprise. Tel Aviv grew rapidly, becoming a major city with a distinctly Hebrew character. By 1925, it had 34,000 residents, making it larger than Jerusalem. The fifth Aliyah brought 250,000 immigrants, driven primarily by Nazi persecution in Germany and growing anti-Semitism across Europe. This massive influx transformed Palestine's demographics and economy, but also intensified Arab fears and opposition. Chaim Weizmann observed, "The world is divided into two parts, those places where Jews cannot live and those where they may not enter." Jewish land purchases, facilitated by organisations like the Jewish National Fund, displaced Arab tenant farmers and created new sources of tension. The Zionist policy of Hebrew labour excluded Arabs from employment in Jewish enterprises, further deepening communal divisions. The Arab community developed its own institutions in response to Zionist growth. The Supreme Muslim Council, established in 1922 with Hajj Amin al-Husayni as Grand Mufti, controlled Islamic endowments and religious affairs. Hajj Amin declared, "Palestine is a sacred trust. We shall never allow it to be alienated from the Muslim world." The Arab Executive Committee, representing various Palestinian Arab factions, demanded representative government and an end to Jewish immigration. Their position was clear: "We demand the establishment of a national government responsible to a parliament elected by the people of Palestine." However, Arab political organisation remained fragmented, weakened by clan rivalries, ideological differences, and the fundamental rejection of the mandate system that made constructive engagement difficult. The Western Wall incident of 1929 demonstrated how religious disputes could escalate into communal violence. The conflict began over Jewish prayer rights at the Western Wall, which Muslims considered part of the Haram al-Sharif and therefore Muslim property. The Shaw Commission later observed, "The question of the rights at the Wailing Wall is one of great complexity and difficulty." On August 24, 1929, Arab mobs attacked the ancient Jewish community of Hebron, killing 67 Jews and forcing the survivors to flee. The Safed massacre claimed 20 Jewish lives, while Jewish retaliation resulted in 116 Arab deaths overall. A Haganah report noted, "We must defend ourselves, but we must not become like our enemies." The British response included 3 major investigations. The Shaw Commission report blamed Arab feeling of disappointment of their political and national aspirations and fear for their economic future. The Hope-Simpson report concluded that there was limited land available for additional Jewish settlement without reducing Arab living standards. The Parsfield White Paper proposed restrictions on Jewish immigration, but was effectively reversed by the MacDonald Letter following intense Zionist pressure. Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald assured Zionist leaders His Majesty's government did not prescribe the policy embodied in the Parsfield White Paper. The Great Arab Revolt represented the most sustained challenge to British rule and Zionist settlement during the Mandate period. The revolt was triggered by several factors: massive Jewish immigration during the Fifth Aliyah, continued land purchases that displaced Arab farmers, and the exclusion of Arabs from the growing Jewish economy. The revolt began in April 1936 with the formation of the Arab Higher Committee under Hajj Amin al-Husayni's leadership. A general strike was declared, and the committee demanded an end to Jewish immigration, prohibition of land sales to Jews, and the establishment of representative government. The Arab Higher Committee proclaimed, "The Arabs of Palestine will continue their general strike until the British government changes its present policy." The revolt was inspired partly by the martyrdom of Izz ad-Din al-Qassam, a Syrian-born preacher who had organised armed resistance against British rule and Jewish settlement. Killed by British forces in 1935, al-Qassam became a symbol of Palestinian resistance. His final words were reported as, "This is jihad, victory, or martyrdom." As the revolt intensified, the British government appointed the Peel Commission to investigate the situation. The Commission's report, published in July 1937, reached a momentous conclusion. The mandate was unworkable, and Palestine should be partitioned into separate Jewish and Arab states. Lord Peel declared, "Partition offers a chance of ultimate peace. No other plan does." The proposed partition would have given the Jews a small state in the Galilee and coastal plain, comprising about 20% of Mandate Palestine, while the Arabs would receive the remainder, minus a British-controlled corridor from Jerusalem to the sea. The Zionist response was mixed. David Ben-Gurion accepted the principle of partition while harbouring larger ambitions. The acceptance of partition does not commit us to renounce Transjordan. One does not demand from anybody to give up his vision. We shall accept a state in the boundaries fixed today, but the boundaries of Zionist aspirations are the concern of the Jewish people, and no external factor will be able to limit them. The Arab Higher Committee rejected partition entirely. The scheme of partition is inadmissible, for it prejudices the right of the people of Palestine against the will of the majority. The rejection of partition led to an escalation of the revolt. Fawzi al-Kawukji, a former Ottoman officer, arrived to command Arab forces, while the British declared martial law and deployed 100,000 troops to suppress the rebellion. The British employed harsh counterinsurgency tactics, including collective punishment, house demolitions, and administrative detention. Villages suspected of harbouring rebels were fined or had their houses destroyed. A British commander explained, "We must show these people that rebellion does not pay." The Jewish community cooperated extensively with British forces. The Haganah provided intelligence and manpower, while Jewish settlement police and supernumerary police units, totalling 15,000 men, assisted in suppressing the revolt. Ben-Gurion articulated the Jewish position. "We shall fight the war as if there were no white paper, and fight the white paper as if there were no war. Captain Ord Wingate, a British officer who trained Jewish forces in counterinsurgency tactics, became a Zionist hero. "I count it as my privilege to help you fight your battle. To that purpose, I want to devote my life," Wingate declared. By 1939, the revolt had been crushed, but at enormous cost. Approximately 5,000 Arabs, 400 Jews, and 200 British personnel had been killed. The Arab political leadership was destroyed, with Hajj Amin al-Husseini fleeing to Lebanon and the Arab Higher Committee banned. A British report concluded, "The Arab rebellion has been crushed, but at enormous cost to Arab society." The suppression of the Arab revolt coincided with the approach of World War II, forcing Britain to reconsider its Palestine policy. The White Paper of 1939, issued by Colonial Secretary Malcolm MacDonald, represented a dramatic reversal of British policy. The White Paper limited Jewish immigration to 75,000 over 5 years, after which further immigration would require Arab consent. Land sales to Jews were restricted, and Britain promised to establish an independent Palestinian state within 10 years with an Arab majority. MacDonald explained, "His Majesty's government believed that the framers of the mandate could not have intended that Palestine should be converted into a Jewish state against the will of the Arab population." The Jewish response was one of outrage and betrayal. The Jewish Agency declared, "The policy of the White Paper is a breach and repudiation of the Balfour Declaration and of the Mandate." Ben-Gurion formulated the famous Zionist strategy: fight Hitler as if there were no White Paper, fight the White Paper as if there were no Hitler. The outbreak of World War II transformed the Palestine situation. Despite their opposition to the White Paper, 27,000 Palestinian Jews volunteered for British military service, including the Jewish Brigade, formed in 1944. Ben-Gurion explained the Jewish position. "We must help Britain win the war, but we must also prepare for the struggle that will come after." The Holocaust, which claimed 6 million Jewish lives, fundamentally altered the moral and political landscape. Chaim Weizmann argued, "Two things remain: the Jewish people and the land of Israel. Hitler has destroyed 1/3 of the Jewish people. Let the other 2/3 live in their own land." The Zionist movement organised illegal immigration to bring Holocaust survivors to Palestine. The Mossad Le'aliyah Bet coordinated refugee ships, though many were intercepted by the British. The Struma disaster of 1942, in which 768 refugees drowned when their ship was sunk, became a symbol of British call. Golda Meir declared, "We cannot and will not accept that there should be no future for our people." The Arab position during the war was more complex. While most Palestinian Arabs remained neutral, Hajj Amin al-Husseini's collaboration with Nazi Germany damaged the Palestinian cause. From Berlin, he broadcast Nazi propaganda and recruited Muslim volunteers for the German army. Hajj Amin told Hitler, "The Arabs are Germany's natural friends because they have the same enemies: the English, the Jews, and the communists." However, most Palestinian Arabs did not support the Nazis, and some served in British forces. As one Arab moderate observed, "This is not our war, but we will not help the Nazis." The end of World War II brought new challenges for British rule in Palestine. President Harry Truman's demand that 100,000 Holocaust survivors be admitted to Palestine put additional pressure on Britain, while the cost of maintaining 100,000 troops in Palestine strained the war-exhausted British economy. Truman declared, "I know what it is to be a member of a persecuted minority." The Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry recommended admitting the 100,000 refugees, but British Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin resisted. "We cannot afford to police Palestine indefinitely." Jewish resistance to British rule intensified after the war. The United Resistance Movement coordinated actions by the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi. The Night of the Bridges saw simultaneous attacks on transportation infrastructure, while the King David Hotel bombing killed 91 people, including British officials, Arabs and Jews. Menachem Begin, leader of the Irgun, declared, We fight, therefore we are. Unable to resolve the Palestine problem, Britain announced its intention to withdraw and referred the matter to the United Nations. The UN Special Committee on Palestine recommended partition, with a majority report favouring the creation of separate Jewish and Arab states. UNSCOP concluded, "The mandate has proved unworkable in practice, and that the only way of solving the Palestine problem is by terminating the mandate and dividing Palestine into two independent states." On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted 33-13 to adopt Resolution 181, partitioning Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international administration. The proposed Jewish state would comprise 56% of Mandate Palestine, despite Jews constituting only 1/3 of the population. Soviet Representative Andrei Gromyko supported partition. The Jewish people have been closely linked with Palestine for a considerable period in history. The Jewish Agency accepted the partition plan, though with reservations about the proposed borders. Ben-Gurion declared, "We accept the UN decision. Even though it gives us less than we hoped for, it gives us the most essential thing, a Jewish state in Eretz Israel." The Arab Higher Committee and Arab League rejected partition entirely. The Arab Higher Committee stated, "Palestine Arabs will never accept the partition of Palestine and will oppose it by all means at their disposal." Arab League Secretary General Abdul Rahman Azzam made an ominous prediction. "This will be a war of extermination and momentous massacre which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacre and the Crusades." The UN partition vote triggered immediate violence between Jewish and Arab communities. The period from November 1947 to May 1948 saw escalating civil war as both sides prepared for the British withdrawal. Initially, Arab forces had the advantage, besieging Jewish settlements and cutting off supply routes to Jerusalem. The Convoy of 35, a Haganah relief force, was wiped out attempting to reach besieged settlements in the Hebron Hills. An Arab commander boasted, "We will strangle the Jewish settlements, one by one." However, the tide turned in spring 1948 with the implementation of Plan Dalet, the Haganah's strategy to secure the borders of the proposed Jewish state and establish territorial continuity between Jewish settlements. Plan Dalet stated, "The operations will be carried out in the following manner: encirclement of hostile bases and their isolation from one another." The Deir Yassin massacre of April 9, 1948 became one of the most controversial events of this period. Irgun and Lehi forces killed 107 Arab villagers, including women and children, in an attack that the Haganah condemned, but which had devastating psychological effects on the Arab population. The Irgun announced, "This is the beginning of the conquest." The Haganah leadership condemned the massacre. The Haganah command expresses its disgust and regret at the shameful act committed by the dissident groups. The massacre, along with other military operations and psychological warfare, contributed to the mass flight of Palestinian Arabs. An Arab refugee later recalled, "We left thinking we would return in a few days when the Arab armies drove out the Jews." By May 1948, major Arab cities had fallen to Jewish forces. Haifa fell on April 23rd, with 65,000 Arabs fleeing. Golda Meir observed, "I don't know something more tragic than our having to fight and shoot at Arabs who only a few months ago worked with us." Jaffa fell on May 13th, with 50,000 Arabs fleeing. The Arab mayor declared, "The city is lost, save yourselves." On May 14th, 1948, as the British Mandate officially ended, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel at the Tel Aviv Museum. The Declaration of Independence stated, "We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel." The declaration promised that the new state would be based on freedom, justice and peace, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel, and would ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. President Truman recognized Israel de facto within 11 minutes of the declaration, while the Soviet Union granted de jure recognition 3 days later. However, the Arab League had already declared its intention to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state. As Ben-Gurion spoke in Tel Aviv, Arab armies were massing on Israel's borders, preparing for what they hoped would be the final battle for Palestine. For Palestinians, the events of 1947 to 1948 represented the Nakba, the destruction of Palestinian society, and the creation of a refugee problem that persists to this day. Approximately 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes, with 531 villages destroyed or depopulated. Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi observed, "The Palestinian exodus was not a voluntary departure, but a flight induced by fear." Israeli historian Benny Morris concluded, "The refugee problem was born of war, not by design, Jewish or Arab. It was largely a byproduct of Arab and Jewish fears, and of the protracted, bitter fighting that characterized the first Israeli-Arab war." The UN Relief and Works Agency, established in 1949 to provide temporary assistance to Palestinian refugees, found itself administering a permanent problem. An UNRWA report noted, "The refugees live in the hope of return, sustained by the belief that their exile is temporary." Summary. The refugees were distributed across the region, 200,000 in Gaza, 280,000 in the West Bank, 100,000 in Lebanon, 75,000 in Syria, and 70,000 in Jordan. The British mandate for Palestine officially ended at midnight on May 14, 1948. 31 years after General Allenby's triumphant entry into Jerusalem, the last British High Commissioner, Sir Alan Cunningham, departed from Haifa port under cover of darkness. The mandate period had seen remarkable achievements: the development of modern institutions, economic growth, and the establishment of thriving Jewish and Arab communities. Tel Aviv had grown from sand dunes to a major city, while Jerusalem had been transformed from an Ottoman provincial town into a modern capital. Yet the mandate had also failed in its fundamental purpose: the impossible promise of the Balfour Declaration to establish a Jewish national home while protecting the rights of existing non-Jewish communities had proved exactly that: impossible. The British had governed Palestine for 31 years, but they had never resolved the fundamental contradiction at the heart of their policy. They had promised the same land to two peoples with incompatible national aspirations, and when forced to choose, they had chosen neither, leaving both communities to fight for their survival. As the last British soldiers departed Palestine, they left behind a land in flames. The civil war that had begun with the UN partition vote was about to escalate into a full-scale regional conflict. The State of Israel had been born, but its Arab neighbours were determined to strangle it in its cradle. The age of the British mandate was over, but its legacy would shape the Middle East for generations to come. The borders drawn by British officials, the institutions they established, and above all, the unresolved conflict between Jewish and Arab nationalisms would continue to influence events long after the Union Jack was lowered for the last time over the Holy Land. The stage was now set for the next chapter in Palestine's long and troubled history: the Arab-Israeli conflict that would define the region for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. At 4 p.m. on May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion's voice echoed through the Tel Aviv Museum as he proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. Within hours, the armies of 5 Arab nations were crossing Palestine's borders, determined to prevent the birth of the Jewish state. What followed was not just a war, but the beginning of a conflict that would reshape the Middle East and capture the world's attention for generations to come. The Arab invasion began at midnight on May 15, 1948, as the British mandate officially ended. Egyptian forces advanced toward Tel Aviv, Syrian troops attacked Galilee settlements, Iraqi forces crossed the Jordan River, Lebanese units entered northern Palestine, and the Arab Legion of Transjordan moved toward Jerusalem. King Abdullah of Jordan had declared, "We will sweep the Jews into the sea," echoing the confident predictions of Arab leaders who expected a swift victory over the nascent Jewish state. However, the Arab armies faced significant challenges. Despite their numerical superiority on paper, they lacked unified command, suffered from poor coordination, and were often equipped with outdated weapons. The Israeli forces, though initially outnumbered, were highly motivated, better organised, and fighting for their survival. Ben-Gurion rallied his people. "We are fighting for our lives and our future. There is no alternative to victory." The war's turning point came during the first truce. While Count Folke Bernadotte, the UN mediator, attempted to broker peace, both sides used the ceasefire to rearm and reorganise. The arms embargo favoured the Arabs initially, but Israeli agents managed to acquire weapons from Czechoslovakia and other sources. Bernadotte observed, "The right of innocent people uprooted from their homes to return should be affirmed." The 10 days campaign saw Israeli forces go on the offensive, capturing the strategic towns of Lydda and Ramleh. The conquest of these towns resulted in the expulsion of 50,000 Arab residents, an event that would later become controversial. Yitzhak Rabin, then a young officer, later recalled, "We walked outside, Ben-Gurion accompanying us." Alon repeated his question, "What is to be done with the population?" Ben-Gurion waved his hand in a gesture which said, "Drive them out." By the war's end in 1949, Israel controlled 78% of Mandate Palestine, significantly more than the 56% allocated by the UN Partition plan. The West Bank was occupied by Jordan, while Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. Jerusalem was divided, with Israel holding the western part, and Jordan controlling the eastern section, including the Old City. Israeli commander Moshe Dayan reflected on the outcome. "We have no solution, and you will continue living like dogs, and whoever wants to can leave." The 1948 war created approximately 750,000 Palestinian refugees, an event Palestinians call the Nakba. The causes of this mass displacement remain contentious, involving military operations, psychological warfare, direct expulsions, and voluntary flight in expectation of a quick return. Palestinian historian Walid Khalidi concluded, "The Palestinian exodus was not a voluntary departure, but a flight induced by fear." Israeli historian Benny Morris offered a more nuanced view. The refugee problem was born of war, not by design, Jewish or Arab. It was largely a byproduct of Arab and Jewish fears, and of the protracted, bitter fighting that characterized the First Israeli-Arab War. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, established in 1949, was intended to provide temporary assistance to Palestinian refugees. However, the temporary became permanent as the refugees were distributed across the region, 200,000 in Gaza, 280,000 in the West Bank, 100,000 in Lebanon, 75,000 in Syria, and 70,000 in Jordan. An UNRWA report noted, "The refugees live in the hope of return, sustained by the belief that their exile is temporary." The armistice agreement signed in 1949 established the Green Line, which became the de facto border between Israel and its Arab neighbours. These agreements were intended as temporary measures pending a final peace settlement, but they endured for nearly 2 decades. Israel used this period to absorb massive immigration. Between 1948 and 1951, 700,000 immigrants arrived, doubling the Jewish population. Operation Magic Carpet brought Yemeni Jews, while Operation Ezra and Nehemiah evacuated Iraqi Jews. Ben-Gurion declared, "Israel will not be complete until every Jew in the world has the opportunity to immigrate." The law of return granted automatic citizenship to any Jew immigrating to Israel. "Every Jew has the right to come to this country as an oleh. Meanwhile, Palestinian political development took different paths in different locations. The All-Palestine government, established in Gaza in 1948 with Hajj Amin al-Husseini as president, remained under Egyptian control and had little real authority. Jordan annexed the West Bank in 1950, making Palestinians Jordanian citizens, though this annexation was recognized by only Britain and Pakistan. King Abdullah justified the annexation. "We are all Arabs, and Palestine is part of the Arab nation." The 1950s saw increasing tensions along Israel's borders, particularly with Egypt and Jordan. Palestinian fedayeen, self-sacrificers, launched cross-border raids from Gaza and the West Bank, prompting Israeli retaliation operations. These raids reflected Palestinian frustration with their stateless condition and the failure of Arab governments to achieve their return. Israeli responses, often disproportionate, were designed to pressure Arab governments to control Palestinian activities. Moshe Dayan explained Israeli strategy. "We cannot guard every water pipe from explosion or every tree from uprooting. We cannot prevent every murder of a worker in an orchard or a family in their beds." The Chibia massacre of October 1953 exemplified the cycle of violence. Israeli Unit 101, commanded by Ariel Sharon, killed 69 Jordanian civilians in retaliation for a fedayeen attack. A UN observer reported bullet-riddled bodies near the doorways and multiple bullet hits on the doors of the demolished houses indicated that the inhabitants had been forced to remain inside until their homes were blown up over them. The Suez Crisis of 1956 marked a significant escalation in Arab-Israeli tensions. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalisation of the Suez Canal in July 1956, combined with his arms deals with the Soviet bloc and support for Palestinian fedayeen, alarmed Israel and its Western allies. Nasser declared, "We shall build the high dams we desire. The annual income of the Suez Canal is $100 million. Why not take it?" The secret Sèvres Protocol of October 1956 coordinated Israeli, British and French action against Egypt. Ben-Gurion saw this as an opportunity. "This is our opportunity to settle accounts with Nasser." Operation Kadesh, Israel's invasion of Sinai, achieved rapid success. Israeli forces reached the Suez Canal within 100 hours, demonstrating the effectiveness of their military doctrine, emphasizing speed, surprise, and decisive action. Moshe Dayan reported, "Our forces have reached the Suez Canal. The Sinai Peninsula is in our hands." However, international pressure, particularly from the United States and Soviet Union, forced Israel to withdraw from Sinai in March 1957. President Eisenhower declared, "We cannot have one law for the weak, another for the strong." The crisis established the UN emergency force in Sinai and Gaza, providing a temporary buffer between Egyptian and Israeli forces. While Israel gained freedom of navigation through the Straits of Tiran, the fundamental issues underlying the Arab-Israeli conflict remained unresolved. The failure of Arab states to achieve Palestinian goals led to the emergence of independent Palestinian political organizations. The Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, founded in 1964 at the First Palestinian National Council, marked a new phase in Palestinian nationalism. Ahmad Shukayri, the PLO's first chairman, articulated Palestinian aspirations in the Palestinian National Charter. The partition of Palestine in 1947 and the establishment of the State of Israel are entirely illegal, regardless of the passage of time. More significant was the emergence of Fatah, founded by Yasser Arafat and other Palestinian exiles in 1959. Unlike the PLO, which was initially controlled by Arab governments, Fatah emphasized Palestinian self-reliance and armed struggle. Arafat declared, "We will not bend or fail until the Palestinian flag flies over the walls and minarets of Jerusalem." Fatah's first attack on January 1st, 1965, targeted an Israeli water installation. Though the operation failed, it marked the beginning of sustained Palestinian guerrilla warfare. A Fatah communiqué proclaimed, "Revolution until victory." The Six-Day War of June 5th to 10th, 1967, fundamentally transformed the Middle East. The war's origins lay in escalating tensions between Israel and its Arab neighbours, particularly Syria and Egypt. In May 1967, Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping and demanded the withdrawal of UN forces from Sinai. He declared, "The Jews threaten war. We tell them, you are welcome, we are ready for war." Jordan's King Hussein, despite Israeli warnings, joined the Egyptian-Syrian alliance. All of the Arab nation is now prepared to act as commandos in the battle for Palestine. Israel's preemptive strike on June 5th, Operation Focus, destroyed the Arab air forces on the ground. An Israeli pilot recalled, "The entire Egyptian air force was destroyed on the ground. It was like a turkey shoot." The conquest of the West Bank and Gaza brought over 1 million Palestinians under Israeli military occupation. The battle for Jerusalem was particularly significant, with Israeli paratroopers reaching the Western Wall for the first time since 1948. Colonel Motagur's famous radio message captured the moment. "The Temple Mount is in our hands. The Temple Mount is in our hands." Defense Minister Moshe Dayan proclaimed, "We have returned to the holiest of our holy places, never to part from it again." The war created 200,000 new Palestinian refugees, many of whom had been displaced for the second time. A Palestinian refugee observed, "We became refugees twice, once in 1948 and again in 1967. UN Security Council Resolution 242, passed in November 1967, established the Land for Peace formula that would guide subsequent peace efforts. The resolution called for withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area. The 1967 defeat discredited Arab governments and strengthened Palestinian organisations. The Battle of Karameh on March 21, 1968, where Palestinian fighters and Jordanian forces jointly resisted an Israeli raid, became a turning point for Palestinian morale. Arafat declared, "Karameh was the turning point. We proved that Arabs can fight." PLO membership soared from 5,000 to 50,000 following Karameh. However, the PLO's growing power in Jordan created tensions with King Hussein's government. Palestinian organisations established a state within a state, controlling refugee camps and challenging Jordanian sovereignty. King Hussein warned, "The Fedayeen have created a state within my state." The crisis culminated in Black September, when Jordanian forces crushed the PLO presence in Jordan. Approximately 3,000 Palestinians were killed in the fighting, and the PLO leadership was forced to relocate to Lebanon. Arafat reflected, "They want to liquidate the Palestinian resistance, but we will never surrender." A Palestinian fighter added, "We leave Jordan, but we will return to Palestine." The October War of 1973 marked another turning point in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Egypt and Syria's coordinated surprise attack on Yom Kippur caught Israel unprepared and shattered the myth of Israeli invincibility. President Anwar Sadat explained his strategy. "We will fight until we recover every inch of our occupied land." The war's aftermath saw significant diplomatic developments. The Arab oil embargo demonstrated the Palestinian strategic value to Arab states, while Arafat's address to the UN General Assembly in November 1974 marked Palestinian diplomatic recognition. King Faisal of Saudi Arabia declared, "We will use oil as a weapon in the battle for Jerusalem." Arafat's UN speech was historic. "I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand." The UN granted the PLO observer status and recognised it as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO's relocation to Lebanon after Black September created new dynamics in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Lebanon's weak central government allowed Palestinian organizations to establish autonomous areas and launch attacks against Israel. The Cairo Agreement of 1969 had granted the PLO significant autonomy in Lebanese refugee camps. A Palestinian commander explained, "From Lebanon, we will liberate Palestine." Israel's Operation Litani in 1978, responding to the Coastal Road massacre, was followed by the more ambitious Operation Peace for Galilee in 1982. Defense Minister Ariel Sharon's goal was to destroy the PLO infrastructure in Lebanon and install a friendly government in Beirut. Sharon declared, "We will destroy the PLO infrastructure in Lebanon once and for all." The siege of Beirut lasted 88 days, with Israeli forces surrounding the Lebanese capital. Arafat vowed, "We will not surrender. Beirut will be the Stalingrad of the Arabs." The Sabra and Shatila massacre of September 1982, where Christian Phalangist militias killed between 800 and 3,500 Palestinian civilians, while Israeli forces controlled the area, became one of the most controversial events of the conflict. The Israeli Kahan Commission concluded, "Israeli leaders bear personal responsibility for the massacre." The PLO's evacuation to Tunisia marked the end of its military presence on Israel's borders. Arafat declared as he departed Beirut, "We will return. Palestine is our homeland." The First Intifada began spontaneously in Gaza following a traffic incident on December 8, 1987, when an Israeli truck killed 4 Palestinians. The uprising quickly spread throughout the occupied territories, characterized by civil disobedience, stone throwing, and mass protests. A Palestinian youth explained, "We have nothing left to lose. We will throw stones until we are free." The Intifada represented a new form of Palestinian resistance, emphasizing popular participation over armed struggle. Intifada leaflets called for strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience. Strike, 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 until the occupation ends. The uprising also saw the emergence of Hamas in 1987, founded by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. Hamas represented a new Islamic nationalist alternative to the secular PLO. The Hamas Charter declared, "Palestine is an Islamic Waqf land consecrated for Muslim generations until Judgment Day." Israel's response, directed by Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin, emphasized force over political solutions. Rabin's iron fist policy resulted in over 1,000 Palestinian and 100 Israeli deaths. Rabin declared, "We will break their bones." The Intifada's international impact was significant, generating sympathy for Palestinian suffering and pressure for a political solution. The PLO's Declaration of Independence in 1988 marked a strategic shift toward accepting a two-state solution. Arafat proclaimed, "In the name of God and the Palestinian people, the Palestine National Council declares the establishment of the State of Palestine." The PLO's renunciation of terrorism opened dialogue with the United States. Arafat declared, "We totally and absolutely renounce all forms of terrorism." The Oslo Accords, signed in September 1993, represented the most significant breakthrough in Israeli-Palestinian relations since 1948. The secret negotiations in Norway produced a declaration of principles that established mutual recognition and a framework for Palestinian self-government. The White House ceremony on September 13, 1993, featured the historic handshake between Rabin and Arafat, witnessed by President Bill Clinton. Rabin declared, "We who have fought against you, the Palestinians, we say to you today, in a loud and a clear voice, enough of blood and tears. Enough." Arafat responded, "The battle for peace is the most difficult battle of our lives." Clinton observed, "Today we bear witness to an extraordinary act in one of history's defining dramas, a drama that began in a time of our ancestors when the word went forth from a sliver of land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. The Oslo II Agreement of 1995 established the Palestinian Authority and divided the West Bank into areas A, B and C, with varying degrees of Palestinian and Israeli control. Arafat proclaimed, "We are building the foundations of our state, stone by stone." However, Israeli settlement expansion continued during the Oslo period, with the settler population doubling. A settlement leader declared, "Oslo will not stop us from building our homeland." The assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin on November 4, 1995, by Jewish extremist Yigal Amir dealt a severe blow to the peace process. Amir justified his action. "I acted alone on God's orders and I have no regrets." Rabin's final speech had warned, "Violence erodes the basis of Israeli democracy. We must condemn it and isolate it." President Shimon Peres reflected, "Yitzhak Rabin was murdered because he wanted to make peace." The election of Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996 slowed the peace process significantly. Netanyahu declared, "Peace with security, not peace at any price." The Camp David Summit of July 2000, hosted by President Clinton, represented the final attempt to achieve a comprehensive Israeli-Palestinian agreement based on the Oslo framework. Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak offered significant concessions, including 91% of the West Bank and shared sovereignty over Jerusalem. Barak later claimed, "I offered Arafat everything, and he said no to everything." Arafat's rejection was based on his refusal to compromise on core Palestinian demands, particularly the right of return for refugees and full sovereignty over East Jerusalem. Arafat declared, "I will not be the one to sign away Jerusalem and the right of return." The Second Intifada began on September 28, 2000, following Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. Sharon declared, "The Temple Mount is in our hands and will remain in our hands. It is the holiest site in Judaism." The uprising quickly escalated beyond the stone-throwing of the First Intifada to include suicide bombings and armed attacks. The death of 12-year-old Mohammed al-Dura, caught in crossfire between Israeli and Palestinian forces, became a symbol of the conflict's impact on civilians. The father's anguished cry was captured on camera. "They are killing my boy! They are killing my boy!" Palestinian suicide bombings, including the Passover massacre of 2002 that killed 30 Israelis, prompted massive Israeli military responses. Hamas declared, "This is the price of occupation." Israel's Operation Defensive Shield in 2002 saw the reoccupation of West Bank cities and the siege of Arafat's compound in Ramallah. Sharon declared, "Israel will hunt down the terrorists wherever they are." Israel's construction of the security barrier, begun in 2002, became one of the most controversial aspects of the conflict. The 440-mile barrier, combining walls, fences and electronic sensors, significantly reduced suicide bombings but also separated Palestinian communities and farmers from their land. An Israeli official justified the barrier. "Good fences make good neighbours." A Palestinian farmer protested, "This wall separates me from my olive trees, my livelihood, my life." The International Court of Justice ruled in 2004 that the barrier's construction in occupied territory violated international law. The construction of the wall, being built by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, is contrary to international law. Ariel Sharon's Gaza disengagement plan of 2005 saw Israel withdraw all settlements and military forces from Gaza, evacuating 8,000 settlers. Sharon explained, "It is not possible to continue holding 3.5 million Palestinians under occupation. It is bad for Israel, bad for the Palestinians, and bad for the Israeli economy." Settler resistance was intense, with one leader declaring, "This is the beginning of the end of the Zionist dream." Hamas's victory in the 2006 Palestinian legislative elections, winning 74 of 132 seats, shocked the international community. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh declared, We will never recognize Israel. This is a matter of principle. The international community impose conditions for engagement, recognize Israel, renounce violence, and accept previous agreements. Hamas responded, "We will not sell our principles for Western money." The 2007 Gaza civil war saw Hamas take complete control of Gaza, while Fatah retained control of the West Bank. A Hamas commander declared, "Gaza is liberated. Now we prepare to liberate the West Bank and Jerusalem." Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on Gaza, severely restricting movement of people and goods. An Israeli official explained, "We will put the people of Gaza on a diet, but not make them die of hunger." The blockade and continued rocket attacks led to a series of conflicts between Israel and Hamas. Operation Cast Lead was a 22-day war that killed 1,400 Palestinians and 13 Israelis. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert declared, "We will not allow Hamas to continue terrorizing our citizens." A Hamas leader responded, "We will continue to resist until the last breath." The UN's Goldstone report alleged war crimes by both sides. Both sides committed actions amounting to war crimes, possibly crimes against humanity. Operation Pillar of Defense 2012 was an 8-day conflict triggered by the assassination of Hamas's military chief. Netanyahu declared, "Israel will not tolerate rocket attacks on its citizens." Operation Protective Edge in 2014 was the longest and most destructive Gaza war, lasting 50 days and killing 2,200 Palestinians and 73 Israelis. The conflict revealed Hamas's extensive tunnel network beneath Gaza. An Israeli soldier observed, "We found a city under the city, tunnels everywhere." A Gaza resident lamented, "Where can we run? There is nowhere safe in Gaza." Despite numerous attempts, the peace process remained stalled throughout the 2000s and 2010s. The Roadmap for Peace, 2003, proposed by the quartet, failed to gain traction. President Bush declared, "I call upon the Palestinians to elect new leaders not compromised by terror." The Annapolis Conference represented Bush's final attempt at comprehensive peace, but no agreement was reached. Palestinian President Abbas stated, "The time has come to end the suffering of both peoples." The Obama administration's efforts, including a settlement freeze demand and Secretary of State John Kerry's intensive shuttle diplomacy, also failed to achieve breakthrough. Obama declared, "The United States does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements." Kerry warned, "The window for a two-state solution is closing." The Trump administration brought significant changes to US policy toward the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the relocation of the US Embassy in 2018 marked a dramatic shift. Trump declared, "It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel." Abbas responded, "These deplorable and unacceptable measures deliberately undermine all peace efforts." The Deal of the Century peace plan, released in 2020, proposed Israeli sovereignty over settlements and a Palestinian state on 70% of the West Bank. Trump claimed, "This is the opportunity of the last century." Palestinians rejected the plan entirely, while the Abraham Accords normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, including the UAE and Bahrain. Netanyahu hailed the accords. "This is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace." A Palestinian official condemned them. "This is a stab in the back of the Palestinian people." The May 2021 crisis demonstrated the conflict's continued volatility. Tensions over Sheikh Jarrah. Evictions and clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque escalated into an 11-day war between Israel and Hamas. A Palestinian resident of Sheikh Jarrah declared, "This is our home. We will not leave." The 11-day conflict killed 250 Palestinians and 13 Israelis before a ceasefire, brokered by Egypt, took effect. President Biden affirmed, "Israel has a right to defend itself." the demographic landscape of historic Palestine continues to evolve. Today, approximately 7 million Jews and 7 million Arabs live between the Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea, with the Palestinian population growing faster than the Jewish population. Israeli settlement expansion has continued, with over 700,000 settlers now living in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. A settlement leader declared, "This is our biblical homeland. We are here to stay." Palestinian demographers note, "Time is on our side. Demographics don't lie." The physical reality on the ground has changed dramatically since Oslo. The West Bank is now divided by settlements, bypass roads, and military checkpoints, making the creation of a viable Palestinian state increasingly difficult. The international community remains divided on the conflict. The International Criminal Court opened a war crimes investigation in 2021, with the prosecutor stating, "Palestine is a state party to the Rome Statute since 2015. Currently, 138 countries recognise the State of Palestine, though major powers like the United States remain opposed. A Palestinian UN observer declared, "We will continue our struggle for recognition and statehood." European Union policy has evolved toward greater criticism of Israeli settlement expansion and support for Palestinian rights, while maintaining Israel's right to security. Young Palestinians and Israelis have grown up knowing only conflict, yet some express hope for a different future. A young Palestinian activist declared, "We are the generation that will see freedom. We will not accept the status quo." A young Israeli responded, "We want peace, but we also want security. The question is how to achieve both." Social media and technology have transformed how the conflict is perceived and fought, with both sides using digital platforms to advance their narratives and mobilize support. The fundamental questions that have defined the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remain unresolved. The viability of the two-state solution, long considered the international consensus, is increasingly questioned by analysts and participants alike. A Palestinian intellectual observed, "The two-state solution is dead. We must think of new paradigms." An Israeli peace activist countered, "We must not give up on the dream of two peoples, two states. The status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the future of Israeli settlements, and the borders of any future Palestinian state remain as contentious as ever." The conflict has exacted an enormous human toll. Since 1948, an estimated 100,000 people have died in various Arab-Israeli wars and Palestinian-Israeli violence. Millions of Palestinians remain refugees or displaced persons, while Israelis have lived under the constant threat of terrorism and war. A bereaved parent from both sides might echo the same sentiment. "I have lost my child to this conflict. When will it end?" Organisations like the Parents Circle Families Forum and Combatants for Peace bring together bereaved families and former fighters from both sides in pursuit of reconciliation. A bereaved father declared, "I refuse to hate. Hatred will not bring back my son." Despite the seemingly intractable nature of the conflict, voices of hope persist on both sides. Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish wrote, "We have on this earth what makes life worth living. April's hesitation, the aroma of bread at dawn, a woman's point of view about men, the works of Aeschylus, the beginning of love, grass on a stone, mothers living on a flute's sigh, and the invader's fear of memories." Israeli author Amos Oz observed, "The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a war between right and wrong, but a tragedy in the ancient sense, a clash between right and right." Now the story of Palestine remains unfinished. The ancient olive trees that have witnessed millennia of history continue to grow in the hills of Palestine and Israel, their roots deep in soil that has known Canaanites and Israelites, Romans and Byzantines, Arabs and Crusaders, Ottomans and British, Palestinians and Israelis. An anonymous Palestinian grandmother plants olive trees. "I plant olive trees not for myself, but for my grandchildren. One day, they will sit in their shade and remember that their grandmother believed in tomorrow." An anonymous Israeli grandfather reflects, "I came here as a refugee seeking a home. I pray my grandchildren will live in peace with their neighbours, that this land will finally know quiet." The sun sets over the Mediterranean, casting long shadows across a land where ancient dreams and modern realities continue to collide, where the past informs the present, and where the future remains unwritten. The story of Palestine continues, shaped by each generation that calls this contested land home. From the Bronze Age settlements of Jericho to the modern cities of Tel Aviv and Ramallah, from the ancient Temple of Solomon to the Dome of the Rock, from the Crusader castles to the Israeli settlements and Palestinian refugee camps, Palestine's history is one of continuous change, conflict, and coexistence. The olive tree endures, offering its shade to all who seek shelter beneath its branches, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or secular. In its persistence lies perhaps the only certainty in Palestine's uncertain future, that this land, sacred to so many, will continue to challenge and inspire those who call it home. The entire history of Palestine is not yet complete. Each day adds new chapters to this ancient story, written by ordinary people seeking extraordinary peace in a land that has known too much war. The story continues, one day at a time, one generation at a time, one hope at a time.